Do you know what it feels like when someone knocks on your door wearing a uniform that looks like police, demanding you hand over your property, and you know for certain they have no authority? But they have a badge. They have the tone of command. They have the confidence of people who have done this many times without anyone questioning them. I've met people like that. They came to my house demanding fuel, 500 gallons of backup gasoline I purchased legally. They thought I was an ordinary resident who would be scared into compliance. They didn't know I'm an FBI agent. And they didn't know that 12 years of training taught me to spot an impersonator in 30 seconds. The doorbell rang at 10:14 on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk reviewing wire transfer records for a fraud case. Routine work, the kind that requires silence and a second cup of coffee. The Arizona sun was already harsh through the blinds, casting long stripes across the floor of my home office. If you've ever had someone show up at your door pretending to be something they're not, you'll understand what happened next. And if you're dealing with HOA overreach right now, drop your story in the comments. This channel exists because none of us should face these situations alone. I set down my mug and walked to the front door. Through the peephole, I saw two men standing on my porch, both wearing dark blue uniforms with badges pinned to their chests. I opened the door but kept my hand on the frame. The taller one spoke first. "Sir, we need to conduct a safety inspection of your property. We've received reports of hazardous fuel storage in violation of community regulations." His voice was flat, practiced, the kind of tone designed to make you comply before you had time to think. The shorter one stood slightly behind him, hand resting near his belt, where I could see a holstered sidearm. They projected authority the way a theater actor projects confidence, convincing from a distance, hollow up close. The morning heat pressed against my face as I stood in the doorway, watching them the way 12 years of fieldwork had trained me to watch. The badges on their chests had no employee numbers, just a generic shield design with the word security embossed at the bottom, in small letters that most people would never notice. Their uniforms resembled Pinal County Sheriff's Office, but the shade of blue was slightly off, and the shoulder patches lacked the county seal. The vehicle parked at the curb was a black Ford Explorer, no light bar, no department markings. Neither of them wore body cameras, close enough to fool most residents, not close enough to fool someone who had testified in federal court about impersonation schemes. I kept my voice neutral. "Are you with Phoenix PD, Pinal County Sheriff?" The tall one didn't miss a beat. "We're authorized by the HOA to conduct safety inspections in this community. There have been concerns about your fuel storage." He gestured vaguely toward my garage, where I kept a 500-gallon backup fuel tank, completely legal under Arizona Fire Code, properly permitted, inspected, and approved by the fire marshal 8 months ago when I moved in. I nodded slowly. HOA doesn't have the authority to conduct inspections on private property. Do you have a warrant? The shorter one stepped forward, jaw tightening. "Sir, this can go easy or hard. We just need to see the fuel tank. Neighbors are concerned about safety. We're trying to help you here." The phrase hung in the air. Trying to help. I had heard those words in case files and witness statements, spoken by people doing anything but helping. I held his gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to see the flicker of uncertainty behind his confidence. "I'm not giving you access to my property without proper identification and legal authority. If you're law enforcement, show me credentials and a warrant. If you're not, leave my property." I closed the door and stood behind it, listening. There was a pause, the kind of silence that meant they were recalculating. Then the tall one muttered something I couldn't catch, followed by the shorter one's response, clear through the door. "Call Victor. He's not cooperating." Footsteps retreated down the porch steps. Car doors opened and closed. The engine started, and the black Explorer pulled away. I waited a full minute before moving. At the front window, I watched the vehicle disappear around the corner. My neighbor across the road, the elderly woman at number 12, stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching me rather than the departing car. When I caught her eye, she turned away quickly and went inside. I noted the reaction. People who look away that fast have usually been told something about you already. I walked back to my desk and opened my laptop. A search through the FBI database for Stanton Security Consulting, Phoenix, Arizona, returned results within seconds. A small private security firm registered in Maricopa County since 2016. No government contracts, no law enforcement affiliation, Owner and sole principal, Victor Stanton. Former Phoenix Police Department, retired in 2014 after 30 years. One disciplinary action on record from 2012. Excessive use of authority. Internal investigation. Settled out of court with no admission of wrongdoing. No criminal charges. No conviction. Just a quiet exit and a pension. I stared at the screen. The men on my porch weren't police officers. They were private security employees dressed in uniforms designed to resemble law enforcement, sent to intimidate a resident into surrendering personal property. And someone named Victor had dispatched them. I photographed the Explorer's license plate from the image I'd captured through the window, a habit from years of documenting evidence before it disappears. Then I created a new folder on my desktop. Stanton, Evidence. Timestamp, 10:31 a.m. I saved the plate number, the database results, and a detailed note describing what they wore, what they said, how they stood, and the hesitation when I asked for credentials. This wasn't over, but they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know who they had just tried to intimidate. And by the time they figured it out, I would have everything I needed.
12 years in the FBI taught me one thing. The best fraudsters never break big laws. They bend small ones. Uniforms that almost match. Badges that almost look real. Authority that almost holds up. They count on people being too polite, too rushed, or too scared to look closely. I looked closely.
2 days later, the letter arrived. Not an email, a physical envelope, thick and official, delivered by certified mail with signature confirmation required. The return address read Ridgewood Estates Homeowners Association with a P.O. box in Scottsdale. I signed for it at the door while the postal carrier waited, her expression neutral and professional. She had no idea what she was delivering. Neither did I, not entirely. But I had a feeling. Inside, was a single sheet of paper on HOA letterhead. The subject line read, Notice of Safety Violation, Unauthorized Fuel Storage. The body of the letter stated that my property had been identified as containing hazardous materials in potential violation of community safety standards. It demanded that I schedule an inspection with HOA authorized personnel within 7 calendar days, or face fines starting at $250 per day, with potential legal action to follow. The signature at the bottom belonged to Margaret Keys, HOA president, but the CC line at the bottom caught my attention. Victor Stanton, Vice President, Community Safety. I set the letter on my desk and pulled up the CC&R documents I had downloaded when I moved into Ridgewood Estates 8 months ago. 83 pages of regulations covering everything from fence heights to mailbox colors. I searched for fuel, storage, hazardous, and inspection. Nothing. Not a single clause authorizes the HOA to inspect private property. Not a single reference to fuel storage as a community concern. The document mentioned fire safety exactly once, in the context of outdoor grills and fire pits. My 500-gallon backup tank, installed in a climate-controlled garage, properly vented, with a permit signed by the Maricopa County Fire Marshal, didn't exist in their regulations. They had invented a violation that wasn't there. I photographed the letter and added it to my evidence folder. Then I sat back and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The knock came at 4:17 that afternoon. I checked the peephole before opening. Habit, not paranoia. The man on my porch was alone this time. Late 50s or early 60s, silver hair cropped short, wearing a navy polo shirt and pressed khakis. No uniform, no badge, just a friendly smile and the posture of someone accustomed to being in charge. I opened the door but didn't step outside. Afternoon, he said, extending his hand. I'm Victor Stanton, Vice President of the HOA. I wanted to stop by personally and clear up any misunderstanding about the inspection. His handshake was firm, practiced. The smile didn't reach his eyes. I noted the way he positioned himself slightly to my left, blocking my view of the street, a technique I had seen in interrogation training, designed to create a subtle sense of enclosure. I received your letter, I said. There's no provision in the CC&R for fuel storage inspections. Victor nodded as if I had said something reasonable, but ultimately beside the point. I understand your concern, but community safety isn't always about what's written down. It's about what makes sense. He paused, letting the words settle. I spent 30 years with Phoenix PD, retired as a sergeant. I've seen what happens when people ignore safety protocols, house fires, explosions, Families devastated. We're just trying to prevent that here. The mention of his police background wasn't casual. It was a credential, a reminder of authority that no longer existed, but still carried weight in conversation. I had seen the tactic before, former law enforcement leveraging their past to create present compliance. It worked on most people. It wasn't going to work on me. My fuel tank is permitted and inspected, I said. The fire marshal signed off on it. I'm not sure what else the HOA needs. Victor's smile faded slightly. Here's the thing. In this community, we look out for each other. That tank of yours, 500 gallons, right? Could be a real asset during emergencies. Power outages, natural disasters. The neighborly thing would be to make it available as a shared resource, a community reserve, if you will. He said it casually, as if he were suggesting I lend someone a cup of sugar. But I heard the subtext clearly. Hand over your property, or this gets worse. You're asking me to give my fuel to the HOA? I'm suggesting cooperation. His voice hardened just enough to notice. I have connections in this county. Fire marshal's office, code enforcement, zoning. Things go smoothly for people who work with the community instead of against it. I'd hate for this to become a bigger issue than it needs to be. There it was, the threat wrapped in courtesy. The power that came not from any official position, but from relationships, favors owed, calls that could be made, inspections that could be scheduled or delayed depending on how cooperative you were. Victor Stanton wasn't offering help. He was offering a choice between submission and harassment. I kept my expression neutral. I'll review the HOA documents and respond in writing. Victor studied me for a moment, recalibrating. Then the smile returned, warmer now, as if we had reached an understanding. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of false camaraderie, and stepped back. Take your time, but don't take too long. These things have a way of escalating when people drag their feet. He walked to his car, a silver Lexus parked at the curb, and drove away without looking back. I closed the door and stood in the silence of my living room. The shoulder where he had touched me still felt warm, intrusive. I walked to my desk and opened a new document. Date, time, location, every word he had said, as close to verbatim as I could reconstruct. The mention of connections, the implication of retaliation. The request, demand, for my property disguised as community spirit. I saved the file to the Stanton folder and sat back. Victor Stanton believed he was dealing with an ordinary resident, someone who would weigh the cost of resistance against the convenience of compliance and choose the easier path. He had built his influence on that assumption, accumulating power through intimidation so subtle that most people didn't recognize it until they were already trapped. But I recognized it. I had spent 12 years studying people who operated exactly this way, outside official channels, beyond clear accountability, protected by a web of relationships that made them feel untouchable. He wasn't untouchable. He just hadn't met anyone willing to pull the thread.
Victor Stanton wasn't a cop anymore, but he still talked like a man with a badge. That was the problem. The badge expired years ago. The habit didn't. He had spent so long wielding borrowed authority that he forgot the difference between power you earn and power you take. I wasn't going to remind him, not yet. A week passed without incident. No more letters, no more uniformed visitors, no more knocks on my door. On the surface, everything had returned to normal. But normal had shifted beneath my feet, and I didn't realize how much until I stepped outside. I usually walked the neighborhood in the early morning, before the Arizona heat made outdoor activity unbearable. For the first 7 months, people had been friendly. Waves from porches, nods at mailboxes. The casual small talk that passes for connection in suburban America. That week, everything changed. The man at number 9, who used to comment on the weather every time we crossed paths, suddenly found his phone very interesting whenever I approached. The couple at number 16 crossed to the opposite sidewalk when they saw me coming, pretending to admire a cactus garden they had walked past 1,000 times. Someone had been talking, someone had been telling a story about me, and it wasn't a flattering one. Linda Marsh confirmed my suspicion on Saturday morning. She lived at number 7, a retired school teacher in her late 60s who kept a vegetable garden in her backyard. She was the only person who still made eye contact with me. I found her watering tomatoes when I walked past, and she gestured me over with a quick motion, checking the street before she spoke. "You should know what Victor's been saying," she said, voice low. "He's telling people you're stockpiling fuel illegally."
that you threatened his security people when they came to help. Some folks are saying you might be," she hesitated, "dangerous." I let the word settle. Dangerous. A man with a legally permitted fuel tank who had refused to let unidentified individuals search his property. And people believe him? Linda's expression shifted, sympathy mixed with resignation. Victor's been here a long time. He knows everyone. He helped to get the streetlights installed on Cedar Drive. He organized the block watch. People trust him. She glanced toward the street again. I believe you, but I can't say that publicly. He got my brother-in-law's construction permit delayed for 6 months over a property line dispute. I can't afford that kind of trouble. She went back to her tomatoes, and I went back to my walk. The HOA Community Board, an online forum I had never bothered to join, provided more evidence that evening. Linda sent me screenshots. Victor had posted 3 times in the past week, never mentioning me by name but making the target unmistakable. Concerning behavior from a new resident, the importance of community cooperation during emergencies. Some people put personal convenience ahead of neighborhood safety. The comments underneath were supportive, grateful, relieved that someone like Victor was looking out for them. 3 days later, I received an email from a neighbor I had never spoken to. The subject line was direct: "Please stop making trouble." The body was 2 sentences long. "We've lived here peacefully for 12 years. Whatever issue you have with the HOA, just handle it quietly so the rest of us don't have to deal with it. No signature, no return address, just the quiet demand to disappear." I understood then exactly what Victor had built. Not a case against me. Nothing so formal, so challengeable. He had constructed a consensus, a shared understanding that I was the problem, that his people were just doing their jobs, that my refusal to cooperate was the only thing that needed explaining. The truth didn't matter anymore. It had been replaced by repetition, by confidence, by the weight of a story told so many times it became the only version anyone remembered. The following week brought a different kind of pressure. I started receiving notices from the HOA about violations I hadn't committed. My trash cans were allegedly placed at the curb, 6 inches beyond the permitted zone. A vehicle registered to my address had been spotted exceeding the 15-mile-per-hour speed limit on a residential street. My front lawn was supposedly a 1/4 inch taller than regulation height. Each notice was minor, petty, and almost laughable in isolation. Together, they formed a file being built, one small infraction at a time, one anonymous complaint after another, all beginning the day after my conversation with Victor. The October HOA meeting happened on a Tuesday evening. I wasn't notified. I found out the following morning when I saw the posted minutes on the community board, summarizing discussions about holiday decorations, parking enforcement, and, buried near the bottom, ongoing compliance concerns regarding a resident on Mesquite Lane. No name, no specifics, just enough to let everyone know the problem hadn't gone away. The meeting had taken place at the clubhouse, 300 feet from my front door, and no one had thought to mention it. I ran into Gary Patterson from number 14 at the mailbox that afternoon. He had been one of the friendlier neighbors when I moved in, offered to help carry boxes, recommended a good mechanic in town. Now he looked at me the way you look at someone whose name you've heard in an unpleasant context. I asked him directly, had he seen the 2 men in uniforms who came to my door 3 weeks ago? His answer was immediate and certain. "I saw 2 officers. They looked official to me. Maybe you should have just let them do their job instead of making a scene." He walked away before I could respond. I stood at the mailbox, holding a water bill and a furniture catalog, understanding exactly what had happened. The community had closed ranks around a version of events that made them comfortable, and I was standing outside the circle. Gary Patterson had seen 2 men in costumes and decided they were police because believing otherwise meant questioning Victor. That was easier, that was safer, that was what everyone had chosen. I documented everything that evening, screenshots of Victor's posts, copies of every notice, Linda's account of the rumors, the anonymous email. The timeline of complaints began precisely when my resistance did. Someone was watching, someone was reporting, and someone was making sure I knew it.
Linda said, "I believe you, but I can't say that publicly." That's how indirect power works. Victor didn't need to threaten her directly. He just needed everyone to remember what happened to the last person who crossed him. Fear doesn't require violence. It only requires one good example and a long memory.
The letter from the law firm arrived on a Thursday. Harrison and Cole, attorneys at law, with offices in Scottsdale. The envelope was heavier than the standard correspondence. Thick paper, embossed letterhead, the kind of presentation designed to communicate seriousness before you read a single word. I opened it at the kitchen table and spread the contents across the surface. 2 pages of legal language, dense with citations and warnings. The letter informed me that the Ridgewood Estates Homeowners Association was considering legal action regarding my ongoing non-compliance with community safety standards and failure to cooperate with authorized inspection procedures. It referenced the original notice I had received, my lack of response, and what it characterized as hostile behavior toward community representatives performing their lawful duties. The deadline for a written response was 10 business days. Failure to respond would be interpreted as an admission of the allegations. I photographed each page and added it to my evidence folder. A search for Harrison and Cole revealed a small practice specializing in HOA disputes. The founding partner, Gerald Harrison, had served 15 years ago as an assistant to a Maricopa County supervisor, the same county where Victor Stanton had spent his career. Not proof of coordination, but not a coincidence either. The fire marshal's office called the following Monday. A woman with a pleasant professional voice explained that they had received a complaint about improperly stored hazardous materials at my address. She apologized for the inconvenience, but explained that all complaints had to be investigated. Could I make myself available for an inspection within the next 48 hours? I could. I did. The inspector was a man in his 50s named Rodriguez, thorough and unhurried. He examined the fuel tank, checked the ventilation, reviewed my permit documentation, and took photographs from multiple angles. The entire process took 90 minutes. At the end, he handed me a yellow carbon copy of his report. No violations found. Permit valid and current. Installation meets or exceeds all applicable fire codes. "You're good," he said, tucking his clipboard under his arm. Whoever filed this complaint was either misinformed or wasting our time. I filed the inspection report with the rest of my documents. 3 days of work were disrupted. No violation found, but that was never the point. The point was the disruption itself. The email from my colleague arrived that Friday. Sarah Chen worked in the administrative division of the Phoenix field office. We had collaborated on a wire fraud case 2 years earlier and stayed in occasional contact. Her message was brief and carefully worded. "Heads up, we received an inquiry about you this week. Someone claiming to be a concerned citizen is asking about your employment status and character references. No official channels, just phishing. Thought you should know." I read the email 3 times. Someone was investigating my background, not through legal discovery, not through proper channels, just quiet questions sent to places where I might have connections, testing to see if pressure could be applied from a different angle. I forwarded the email to my personal archive and made a note of the date. If you're still watching, consider subscribing. Stories like this are why this channel exists, and your support helps us keep going. The emergency board meeting was announced for the following Tuesday. I learned about it through the community forum, where the notice had been posted with less than 24 hours warning. Special session, resident compliance, and community safety standards. The agenda listed 3 items: a review of ongoing concerns, a discussion of enforcement options, and a vote on appropriate measures. My name wasn't mentioned, my address wasn't mentioned, but everyone who read it knew exactly who it was about. I wasn't invited to attend. The notice specified that the session was closed to general membership pending resolution of sensitive matters. I would not have an opportunity to speak, to present evidence, to challenge the narrative that had been constructed around me. The board would meet, discuss, vote, and announce their decision, all without input from the person whose life they were discussing. I sat in my home office that evening, staring at the folder on my desktop. It contained 47 documents now: letters, notices, screenshots, photographs, timeline of a campaign designed to make me surrender or disappear, legal pressure, administrative harassment, social isolation, background inquiries reaching into my professional life, all of it pointing toward one outcome. The target gives up, the target goes away, and everyone agrees the community is better off. That's what Victor expected. Quiet surrender. He assumed I was an ordinary resident with ordinary tolerance for conflict. He didn't know that I had spent 12 years watching people like him, people who built influence on intimidation and silence and the slow grinding of bureaucracy. He didn't know that I had dismantled those operations, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but accountability. He was about to find out.
They didn't need to convict me of anything. They just needed to exhaust me, make every day a little harder, make every interaction a little more uncomfortable, make the cost of staying higher than the cost of leaving. That's how indirect power operates, slow, steady, and invisible until you're already drowning.
The morning after the emergency board meeting announcement, I woke up at 5:30 and didn't go back to sleep. I made coffee, sat at my desk, and opened the evidence folder on my laptop. 47 documents. 6 weeks of pressure, harassment, and isolation, all reduced to timestamps and screenshots and carefully worded notes. It wasn't enough to feel wronged. It wasn't enough to know the truth. What mattered now was proving it, assembling every piece into a structure that couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be explained away, couldn't be buried under Victor Stanton's carefully constructed consensus. I started with the Ring doorbell footage from the first encounter. The video was crisp, recorded in 1080 resolution with clear audio. 2 men in dark blue uniforms were standing on my porch at 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I paused on the clearest frame of each face and exported the images. Then I played the audio again, listening for every word. We need to conduct a safety inspection. We're authorized by the HOA. This can go easy or hard. I transcribed the entire conversation, noting the exact moment when the shorter one mentioned calling Victor. Timestamp 10:22 a.m. The license plate from the black Ford Explorer matched the registration I had pulled from the database. The vehicle belonged to Stanton Security Consulting, registered to a commercial address in Mesa. I printed the registration document and added it to the physical file I was building, a backup to the digital records, because evidence that exists in only one place can disappear. Next, I created a master timeline. Every event, every letter, every notice, arranged in chronological order with dates, times, and sources. The pattern was unmistakable once you saw it laid out. Day 1, fake officers arrive, are refused entry. Day 3, certified letter from HOA alleging safety violation. Day 4, Victor Stanton visits personally, mentions connections, and implies consequences. Week 2, rumors begin circulating, neighbors stop making eye contact. Week 3, anonymous complaints filed about trash cans, lawn height, and vehicle speed. Week 4, fire marshal inspection triggered by complaint. Week 5, law firm letter threatening legal action. Week 6, inquiry to the FBI about my employment status. Week 7, emergency board meeting announced without my notification or participation. Each escalation followed the previous one with precision. This wasn't reactive, it was orchestrated. Victor had a playbook, and he was running it step by step, applying pressure from multiple directions until the target either surrendered or broke. I had seen this pattern before in fraud cases, in extortion schemes, in organized harassment campaigns. The difference was that most targets didn't have the training to recognize it or the resources to fight back. I did. Linda Marsh had been sending me screenshots throughout the ordeal, Victor's posts on the community forum, comments from neighbors, the announcement of meetings I wasn't invited to. I organized them chronologically and cross-referenced them with the official notices I had received. The correlation was perfect. Every time Victor posted about concerning behavior or community safety, a new complaint or notice arrived within 48 hours. He was coordinating the pressure, using the forum to signal his allies and create the appearance of organic community concern. The background inquiry was harder to trace. Sarah Chen's email had warned me that someone was fishing for information about my employment, but the source was anonymous. A generic email address, no identifying details. I couldn't prove Victor had sent it, but I could prove when it happened, and I could show that it fit the pattern of escalating harassment. Another data point, another thread in the web. I spent 3 hours that afternoon reviewing Arizona law. Impersonating a peace officer was a Class Civics felony under Arizona Revised Statutes 13 to 2411. The elements were clear. Wearing a uniform or badge designed to deceive, exercising or attempting to exercise authority reserved for law enforcement, with the intent to induce compliance. Derek Hollis and his partner had done all three. They had worn uniforms that closely resembled Pinal County Sheriff's Office. They had claimed authority to conduct inspections and threatened consequences for non-compliance. They had done so at the direction of Victor Stanton, who had sent them to my door and was waiting for their report. If you've made it this far, you understand why stories like this matter. This channel exists because too many people face situations like mine alone, without knowing their rights or how to fight back. If you've dealt with HOA overreach, fake authority, or coordinated harassment, share your experience in the comments. And if this content helps you, consider subscribing. It's how we keep these conversations going. That evening, I made a call I had been considering for weeks. Christian Robinson was the assistant special agent in charge at the FBI Phoenix field office, my direct superior in the chain of command. I had worked with him on 3 major cases over the past 4 years. He was methodical, skeptical, and deeply allergic to anything that smelled like an agent using their position for personal advantage. I respected him for that. It was why I had waited so long to involve him. "I need to ask you something off the record," I said when he answered. "Stanton Security Consulting. Have we ever looked at them?" There was a pause. I heard him typing. "Small outfit in Mesa. No current investigations. But there are 2 complaints in the system from a few years back. Aggressive collection tactics, possible intimidation, nothing that went anywhere." Another pause. "Why are you asking?" I gave him the short version. The fake officers, the harassment campaign, the coordinated pressure. The background inquiry had reached into our own office. He listened without interrupting, which was how I knew he was taking it seriously. "You're not asking me to open a case," he said when I finished. It wasn't a question. "No, this is local. Impersonation, possible extortion, Phoenix PD can handle it. I just needed to know if there was something bigger I was missing." "There isn't, but document everything, and be careful. People like this, they don't stop until someone makes them stop." I thanked him and hung up. The call had confirmed what I suspected. Victor Stanton wasn't connected to anything larger, wasn't protected by anything official. He was a small-time operator running a small-time scheme, leveraging old relationships and borrowed authority to intimidate people who didn't know better. The problem was that most people didn't know better. Most people saw the uniforms and the badges and the confident voices and assumed they were real. Most people gave in. I wasn't most people, and I was done waiting. I drafted an email to the HOA office that night, polite, formal, requesting a meeting to discuss the ongoing compliance concerns and explore a resolution. I knew Victor would interpret it as surrender, the difficult resident finally ready to cooperate. I knew he would come personally, probably with Derek or another uniformed employee, expecting to dictate terms. I was counting on it. I checked my equipment. The indoor cameras were positioned to capture the living room and front entrance. The audio recording app on my phone was tested and ready. Arizona was a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record any conversation I participated in. The non-emergency line for Phoenix PD was saved in my contacts. Everything was in place. The confirmation email arrived the next morning. Victor Stanton and a security representative would visit my residence on Thursday at 2 p.m. to discuss the matter in person and reach an amicable resolution. Thursday, 48 hours. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop and looked out the window at the quiet street. The neighbors had stopped waving. The community had closed ranks against me. The system that had been designed to make me disappear. In 48 hours, that system was going to meet the one thing it couldn't handle. Someone who understood exactly how it worked and wasn't afraid to let it collapse.
They thought I was waiting. They thought I was afraid. They thought silence meant defeat. But waiting and preparing are not the same thing. Every document I saved, every timestamp I recorded, every pattern I traced, it was all building toward a moment they couldn't see coming. I had been ready for weeks. Now, I was finished waiting.
Thursday arrived with clear skies and a stillness that felt almost theatrical. I had been awake since 5, reviewing the setup one final time. Cameras positioned, phone charged and recording app ready, Phoenix PD non-emergency line on speed dial. The house was clean, quiet, and waiting. So was I. The doorbell rang at 2:03 p.m., 3 minutes late, which told me Victor wanted to establish control from the first moment. I took a breath, checked the camera feed on my phone to confirm who was standing on my porch, and opened the door. Victor Stanton stood in front, wearing the same navy polo and pressed khakis from our first meeting. Behind him was Derek Hollis, the taller of the 2 men who had come to my door 6 weeks ago. He was in uniform again, dark blue shirt, generic badge, utility belt with handcuffs visible at the hip. No body camera, no radio chatter, the same costume, the same performance. They hadn't learned anything. "Afternoon," Victor said, stepping forward without waiting to be invited. "Glad you came to your senses. Let's get this sorted out." I didn't move from the doorway. "We can talk here." Victor's smile flickered. "This would be easier inside, more private." "Here is fine." Derek shifted his weight, hand drifting toward his belt. "Sir, Mr. Stanton is trying to help you. The HOA has been more than patient. We're authorized to resolve this situation today, one way or another." I looked at him directly. "Authorized by whom?" "By the community." Derek's voice hardened. "You've been non-compliant for weeks, ignoring notices, refusing inspections. You're a safety risk to this neighborhood, and we're here to address that." "And if I don't cooperate?" Derek stepped closer. "Then I'm going to need you to step outside, sir. You're being detained for obstruction and violation of community safety regulations." The word hung in the air. Detained. I let the silence stretch for 3 seconds before responding. "Detained by whom? Under what legal authority?" Victor cut in, his voice carrying the practiced patience of a man who had done this many times. "I spent 30 years with Phoenix PD. I know how this works. We're not here to make trouble. We're here to solve a problem. But if you force our hand, we have the authority to escalate." "You don't have any authority," I said. "You're retired. Your employee is wearing a costume designed to look like law enforcement. Neither of you has the legal right to detain anyone, enter my property, or enforce anything beyond a strongly worded letter." Victor's jaw tightened. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Actually," I said, "I do." I took out my phone and dialed. The call connected on the second ring. "Phoenix Police Department, this is the non-emergency line." I kept my voice calm and clear. "I'd like to report 2 individuals at my residence impersonating police officers and attempting to unlawfully detain me. They're still on my property." Derek took a step back. Victor didn't move. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, calculation, and something that might have been fear before it hardened into defiance. "Go ahead," he said. "Disarmed," he said. "Call whoever you want. My friends at the department will straighten this out in 5 minutes." I ended the call and waited. Victor crossed his arms, projecting confidence he no longer felt. Derek glanced at the street, then at Victor, then at me. The performance was cracking. 15 minutes later, a Phoenix PD patrol car pulled up to the curb. Sergeant Diane Ortega stepped out, mid-40s, short dark hair, the kind of posture that communicated authority without effort. She approached the porch slowly, eyes moving between the 3 of us, assessing the situation before anyone spoke. "Someone wants to tell me what's going on here?" Victor spoke first, voice shifting into the warm, collegial tone of a fellow professional. "Officer, I'm Victor Stanton, retired Phoenix PD, 30 years. We're just having a community discussion with a difficult resident. No need for concern." Ortega looked at Derek. "And you are?" "Security consultant," Derek said, "working with the HOA. Why are you dressed like that?" Derek hesitated. "It's a uniform, standard for our company." Ortega stepped closer, examining the badge on his chest. No employee number, no agency affiliation, just a generic shield with the word security in small letters. She looked at the utility belt. Handcuffs, no firearm, no radio, no body camera. "This uniform is designed to look like law enforcement," she said. It wasn't a question. "It's just company policy. Did you attempt to detain this resident?" Silence. Derek looked at Victor. Victor said nothing. Ortega turned to me. "Sir, did this individual claim authority to detain you?" "Yes. He said I was being detained for obstruction and safety violations." His exact words. Ortega nodded slowly. Then she looked at Victor. "Mr. Stanton, I'm going to need you to step over to my vehicle. We're going to have a conversation about what happened here." Victor's composure finally broke. "This is ridiculous. I'm a retired sergeant. I know half the guys in your precinct. This is a misunderstanding. Then we'll clear it up. But right now, you're going to step over to my vehicle." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my FBI credentials. Not to intimidate, but to clarify. "Sergeant, I'm a federal agent. I've been documenting this situation for 6 weeks. I have video, audio, and a complete timeline of harassment and impersonation. I'm happy to provide everything to your department." Ortega looked at the credentials, then at me, then at Victor. The retired sergeant's face had gone pale. Whatever he had expected from this encounter, it wasn't this. "Hollis," Ortega said, turning to Derek. "Hands behind your back. You're being detained for suspicion of impersonating a peace officer. You have the right to remain silent." Derek didn't resist. The handcuffs clicked into place. The real ones, from a real officer, carrying real authority. Victor watched in silence as his employee was walked to the patrol car. Then Ortega turned back to him. "Mr. Stanton, you're not under arrest at this time, but you're going to answer some questions, and I suggest you do so honestly, because right now you're looking at conspiracy charges, and that's before we get into the harassment complaints I'm already hearing about." She escorted him to the patrol car. He went without protest, but his shoulders had dropped, his confidence had evaporated. The man who had walked onto my porch 3 minutes ago, expecting to dictate terms, was now sitting in the back of a police vehicle, waiting to explain himself. Neighbors had gathered at the edges of their yards. I saw Linda Marsh standing on her porch, hand over her mouth. Gary Patterson from number 14 was frozen at his mailbox, watching. The couple from number 16 had stopped pretending to garden and were openly staring. Everyone who had avoided me, whispered about me, believed Victor's version of events. They were all watching now. I stood on my porch and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The truth was speaking for itself.
Victor's hands trembled as Ortega asked him to step toward the patrol car. Not from the cold. The Arizona afternoon was warm and bright. His hands shook because, for the first time in a decade, he wasn't controlling the situation. His body knew it before his mind could accept it. Linda stood on her porch, watching Derek get handcuffed. She turned to the woman beside her and said, quietly but clearly enough to carry, "I knew something was wrong. I knew it." She had known for weeks, but only now, with a police car on the street, did she dare to say it out loud. The news traveled faster than I expected. By the time the patrol car pulled away with Derek Hollis in the back seat and Victor Stanton following in a second vehicle for questioning, half the neighborhood had gathered on porches and driveways. They watched in silence. The kind of silence that happens when a story people believed is publicly contradicted. No one approached me. No one asked questions. They just watched, recalculating. I went inside and closed the door. The adrenaline was still there, humming beneath my skin, but I didn't let it take over. There was still work to do. I transferred the doorbell footage to a secure backup, exported the audio recording from my phone, and added time-stamped notes to the evidence file. Whatever happened next, the documentation would be complete. The first official update came 48 hours later. Sergeant Ortega called to inform me that Derek Hollis had been formally charged with impersonating a peace officer, a Class 6 felony under Arizona law, and attempted unlawful detention, a Class 5 felony. Bail had been set at $25,000. He was released within hours, but the charges would follow him. A court date was pending. Victor Stanton's situation was more complicated. He hadn't worn a uniform or directly claimed to be law enforcement, but the investigation was expanding. Ortega mentioned that detectives were looking into conspiracy to impersonate, potential extortion, and abuse of authority in his role as HOA vice president. Multiple residents had come forward with complaints: harassment, intimidation, pressure to comply with demands that had no legal basis. I wasn't the first. I was just the first one who fought back with documentation. The HOA responded within a week. An emergency board meeting was called, a real one this time, with proper notice and open attendance. Margaret Keyes, the president, issued a statement acknowledging serious concerns about the conduct of certain officers and announcing that Victor Stanton had resigned from his position for personal reasons. The statement didn't mention the police investigation. It didn't mention Derek Hollis. It didn't mention me. But everyone in the community knew exactly what it meant. I received a formal letter from the HOA the following Monday. It was brief, carefully worded, and almost certainly drafted by an attorney. The letter regretted any inconvenience I had experienced and informed me that all pending compliance notices against my properties had been reviewed and withdrawn due to administrative errors. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing, just a quiet erasure of the paper trail they had built against me. I filed the letter with everything else, evidence of what they had done, evidence of how they had tried to undo it. The social consequences unfolded more slowly, but they were no less complete. Victor Stanton's silver Lexus stopped appearing in the neighborhood within days of his resignation.
By the second week, a for sale sign appeared in front of his house. The price was aggressive, 15% below market value, the kind of number that signals urgency. He wanted out. He wanted distance between himself and the community he had tried to control. Stanton's security consulting didn't survive the scrutiny. The Arizona Department of Public Safety opened a review of the company's licensing following the impersonation charges. Within a month, the license was suspended pending investigation. The company website went offline. The phone number was disconnected. Whatever Victor had built over the past decade collapsed in a matter of weeks. Christian Robinson called me on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the arrest. Maricopa County DA is considering expanding the case, he said. Turns out there are at least 4 other residents who experienced similar harassment over the past few years. None of them reported it at the time. They either moved away or just stopped fighting. But now that Victor's name is in the system, they're coming forward. Are you asking me to get involved? No. Conflict of interest. But I wanted you to know, what you did matters. You created a record. You forced the system to respond. That's going to help people who couldn't help themselves. I thanked him and ended the call. The validation felt strange, not unwelcome, but not celebratory either. I hadn't done this for recognition. I had done it because it was the only option that didn't involve surrendering something I had every right to keep. The neighbors began acknowledging me again. It started with small gestures, a wave from across the street, a nod at the mailbox. Linda Marsh was the first to speak to me directly. She came by with a plate of cookies and an apology that was clearly rehearsed, but no less sincere for it. I should have said something sooner, she told me. I knew what Victor was doing. I just didn't think anyone could stop him. You helped when it mattered, I said. The screenshots, the information, it made a difference. She nodded, but the guilt was still there in her eyes. She had watched me get isolated and attacked, and she had stayed silent until silence was no longer safe. I didn't blame her. I understood the calculation. When someone like Victor controls the narrative, speaking up feels like stepping in front of a train. Most people don't have the resources to survive that. Gary Patterson never apologized. I saw him at the mailbox a week after the arrest, and he looked away the moment our eyes met. He had told me to let the officers do their job. He had believed Victor's version without question. Now, he had to live with knowing he had been wrong. And worse, that his certainty had been part of the machine designed to break me. Some people process that kind of realization. Others just avoid it. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need anyone's. The truth had spoken for itself, in handcuffs and court filings, and the slow unraveling of a man who thought he was untouchable. By the end of the month, Victor's house was under contract. A young couple from California, according to Linda. They had no idea who had lived there before. They would never know the history of the man who had used that address as a base of operations for years of quiet intimidation. The neighborhood would reset, the memory would fade, and eventually, Victor Stanton would become a story people told at barbecues. The HOA guy who got arrested, remember him? But I would remember all of it. Every document, every timestamp, every moment of isolation and pressure that had been designed to make me disappear. I had kept every record, and the records had kept me standing.
The community changed slowly. No one apologized publicly for believing Victor. No one admitted they had been wrong. But they started waving again when I walked past. They started saying hello at the mailbox. Small gestures, quiet acknowledgments. Not redemption, just the slow, awkward return of people who had chosen the wrong side and knew it.
3 months passed. Winter in Arizona meant clear skies, cool mornings, and the kind of quiet that felt earned rather than imposed. I still lived in the same house on Mesquite Lane. The 500-gallon fuel tank still sat in my garage, properly permitted, legally installed, and completely untouched by anyone who didn't have the right to touch it. The legal proceedings concluded in stages. Derek Hollis accepted a plea deal in February, probation, community service, and a permanent ban from security work in Arizona. His testimony confirmed what I had documented. The uniforms were designed to deceive, the intimidation was coordinated, and the operation had been running for years. Victor Stanton's case took longer. The Maricopa County District Attorney's Office built a case that extended far beyond my complaint. 4 other residents came forward with stories that mirrored mine. Fake inspections, fabricated violations, pressure to hand over property, or pay fees that had no legal basis. One family had moved out of state rather than continue fighting. Another had paid Victor nearly $3,000 in consulting fees to make the harassment stop. In March, Victor accepted a plea agreement, conspiracy to commit extortion. The judge sentenced him to 18 months, suspended to 6 months, served with the remainder on supervised probation. Restitution to all identified victims totaled nearly $12,000. 30 years of service with Phoenix Pete ended with a conviction that would follow him for the rest of his life. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. The outcome had been recorded. That was enough. The HOA underwent its own transformation. Margaret Keyes resigned as president. Linda Marsh won a seat on the new board, the first time she had ever participated in governance. Their first action was a comprehensive review of the CCNR documents, removing vague language about community safety that Victor had exploited for years and adding explicit protections for residents facing complaints. They passed a resolution prohibiting private security personnel from any enforcement activities. The Stanton model was officially dead. The neighbors returned to normal gradually. The couple from number 16 invited me to a backyard barbecue in May, the first social invitation since the harassment began. I went. I ate a hamburger. I talked about the weather and the Diamondbacks. No one mentioned Victor. No one mentioned the uniforms or the police cars or the months of isolation. The past had been quietly archived, stored somewhere out of sight where it couldn't make anyone uncomfortable. I understood the impulse. People don't like being reminded that they chose the wrong side. It's easier to move forward, to pretend the past was a misunderstanding rather than a failure. I didn't hold it against them. This quiet reset was probably the healthiest outcome anyone could hope for. But I remembered. Every document was still in the folder on my desktop. Not because I planned to use them again. The legal process was complete. I kept them because the next time someone in this neighborhood faces pressure they don't deserve, there will be proof that the system can work, if you're willing to make it work. I sat on my porch on a Thursday evening in late May, watching the sunset behind the Superstition Mountains. The sky turned orange, then pink, then purple, fading into stars. The street was quiet. Somewhere in a county jail, Victor Stanton was serving the first weeks of his sentence. And here I was, in the house I had chosen, with my dignity intact. They had tried to make me disappear. They had used uniforms and paperwork and whispered rumors, and they had failed. Not because I was stronger or luckier, but because the truth, properly documented, doesn't need volume or anger. It just needs patience. The fuel tank was still in my garage, full, permitted, and mine.
Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a resignation letter, a court filing, a for sale sign on a lawn. Sometimes it arrives in the silence of people who used to threaten you and now can't meet your eyes. That silence isn't an apology, but it's acknowledgement, and acknowledgement is where healing begins.